Arizona Territory, 1878. The relentless sun bore down on Rebecca Hartwell's back as she stepped off the stagecoach, her boots landing in the dust of Mesa Verde with a finality that echoed her resolve. 5 years had passed since the attack that had stolen everything from her family, her home, her innocence. 5 years since she had watched from her hiding place as Apache warriors set fire to her childhood, the flames reflected in her wide, terrified eyes. Now at 22, she had returned to the territory that had birthed her nightmares, clutching nothing but a letter of appointment as the town's new schoolteacher and the hatred that had kept her alive. Miss Hartwell, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard, approached, hat in hand. "Sheriff Caldwell, welcome to Mesa Verde. Hope your journey wasn't too trying." Rebecca adjusted her simple blue dress, the only one she owned that wasn't black. "Thank you, Sheriff. The journey was educational." "Educational?" His eyebrow raised. "I counted 17 military outposts and 4 Apache raids reported along the way." Her voice remained steady, practiced. "Your territory seems to be at war." The sheriff's weathered face grew serious. "Not a war, Miss Hartwell, a slow bleeding. The reservation system's breaking down. Renegade bands are leaving, fighting back. Can't say I blame them entirely, but—" He shook his head. "Town council thought you might reconsider coming once you heard." Rebecca lifted her chin. "I'm precisely where I intend to be, Sheriff." What she didn't say was why. Why she had chosen this remote outpost when she could have secured a teaching position in any civilized eastern town. Why her hands trembled slightly despite her composed exterior. Why her nightmares still echoed with her mother's final scream. The sheriff nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The schoolhouse has living quarters attached. Nothing fancy, but it's yours. School term starts in 3 days. 28 children, ages 5 to 16. "And what of the Apache situation?" Rebecca asked, her voice deliberately neutral. "Kohvari's banned. They've been raiding ranches within 50 miles. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Army's been hunting them for months. Kohvari's clever. Former scout for the cavalry before he turned. Knows our tactics better than we do." Rebecca's heart quickened at the name, committing it to memory. "Kohvari," she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. "Best you focus on teaching, Miss Hartwell. Leave the Apache problem to men with guns." Rebecca offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Sheriff. I'm just a schoolteacher after all." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure with large windows and a small bell tower. The attached living quarters were modest, a bedroom, small kitchen and sitting area. Rebecca unpacked methodically, placing her few possessions with precision, clothes in the wardrobe, books on the shelf, her father's pocket watch on the bedside table. Last came the knife, its blade gleaming in the fading light. She had purchased it in Boston, trained with it in secret. Now she slid it under her pillow, a ritual performed every night since she had decided to return west. That evening she stood at her window, watching as the vast desert beyond Mesa Verde turned gold, then crimson, then deep purple with the setting sun. In the distance the mountains rose like ancient guardians, their shadows harboring secrets and enemies. "I'm here," she whispered to the empty room, to the ghosts that had followed her across the continent. "I'm here, and I won't leave until it's finished." 3 weeks passed. Rebecca threw herself into teaching with the same single-minded determination that had brought her west. The children of Mesa Verde, ranchers' offspring, shopkeepers' sons and daughters, a few Mexican children from the nearby farms, looked at her with curiosity at first, then growing respect as they discovered her firm but fair methods. By day she was Miss Hartwell, devoted educator. By night she pored over maps of the territory, marking locations of reported Apache sightings, committing terrain features to memory. The knife remained under her pillow, a companion more constant than sleep. On the last Saturday of her first month, Rebecca rode out alone despite warnings from the sheriff. She told herself it was to gather botanical specimens for her science lessons. The truth was more complex. She needed to understand the land, to see what her enemies saw. The desert spread before her, a harsh beauty that defied her expectations. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels. Red rock formations caught the light like blood crystallized into stone. The silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. She dismounted near a small stream, tethering her horse to a scrubby mesquite tree. Kneeling beside the water, she watched her reflection waver and distort. "Who are you really, Rebecca Hartwell?" she whispered to the stranger in the water. The sound came without warning, a horse's soft nickering that wasn't her own. Rebecca froze, her hand moving instinctively to the small revolver concealed in her skirt pocket. She turned slowly, and the world seemed to stop. Across the stream stood an Apache warrior, his obsidian eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was tall, copper-skinned, with high cheekbones and a scar that traced from his temple to his jaw. His black hair was bound with a leather cord, and he wore buckskin leggings and a cavalry jacket. Stolen, no doubt. Rebecca knew instantly who he was. The descriptions from survivors matched too perfectly. "Kohvari?" she breathed, her hand tightening on her revolver. The warrior's expression revealed nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she knew his name. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, they simply stared at each other across the narrow stream. Predator and prey, though Rebecca wasn't certain which was which. Then his gaze shifted to something behind her, and his expression changed. Before Rebecca could turn, strong hands grabbed her from behind, a cloth pressed against her face, smelling of strange herbs. She struggled fiercely, managing to fire one wild shot from her revolver before darkness claimed her. Her last conscious thought was of bitter irony. She had come seeking vengeance, only to become its victim instead. Rebecca awoke to darkness and the smell of cedar smoke. Her head throbbed with each heartbeat, and her mouth felt dry as desert sand. She tried to move and found her hands bound in front of her with leather strips, tight enough to secure, but not to pain. Gradually her eyes adjusted to the dimness. She lay on a bed of furs inside what appeared to be a wickiup, a traditional Apache dwelling made of branches and hides. Moonlight filtered through small gaps in the structure, casting silver patterns across the earthen floor. The memory of her capture flooded back, along with a wave of fear that she quickly suppressed. Fear was useless. Hatred was stronger. The entrance flap moved aside, and a figure entered, the warrior from the stream, Kohvari. In the confined space he seemed even taller, more imposing. He carried a wooden bowl and a water skin. Rebecca pushed herself upright, her eyes blazing in the darkness. "If you're going to kill me, get on with it," she said in English, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Kohvari studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he responded in accented but clear English. "If I wanted you dead, you would not have awakened." He placed the bowl beside her, some kind of stew steaming in the cool night air, and the water skin within reach of her bound hands. Rebecca laughed bitterly. "So I'm to be kept alive? For what purpose? Ransom? Or something worse?" "You are alive because you are not my enemy," he said simply. "Eat. Drink. Not your enemy?" Her voice rose, trembling with fury. "You slaughter innocent families, you burn homes, you steal children from their beds. And you say I'm not your enemy?" Kohvari's expression remained impassive, though something flickered in his dark eyes, a shadow of emotion Rebecca couldn't name. "Your bullets were meant for me before you knew my face," he said quietly. "Who is the true enemy here?" Rebecca turned away, refusing the food, refusing to acknowledge the unwelcome logic in his words. "I would rather starve than accept anything from Apache hands." Kohvari regarded her silently for a moment longer. "Hatred is a slow poison," he said finally. "It kills the one who carries it first." He left the food and water and exited the wickiup without another word. Alone again, Rebecca fought against unexpected tears. She would not break. She would not show weakness. She would find a way to escape, or to complete what she had come to Arizona to do. The night passed slowly. Despite her resolution, thirst eventually forced her to drink from the water skin. She refused the food, though her stomach protested painfully. Morning brought harsh light through the wickiup's entrance. Rebecca had slept fitfully, dreams plagued by flames and screams and dark, unreadable eyes. The food bowl had been removed while she slept, replaced with fresh water. She used the opportunity to examine her surroundings more carefully. The wickiup contained few possessions: a buffalo robe, some weapons wrapped in cloth, a small wooden box decorated with intricate carvings. Nothing that offered an immediate means of escape. The camp sounds beyond the dwelling told her there were others. Voices speaking in Apache, the whinnying of horses, the laughter of children. The realization chilled her. She was in the heart of an Apache camp, surrounded by the very people she had sworn to hate. The entrance flap moved again, and this time an elderly woman entered. Her face was deeply lined, her silver hair braided with colored beads. She carried a small basket and regarded Rebecca with curious, shrewd eyes. The old woman spoke in Apache, gesturing to Rebecca's dirty dress and disheveled appearance. When Rebecca didn't respond, she switched to halting English. "You? Come, wash." She tugged at Rebecca's bound hands. Rebecca hesitated, then stood on unsteady legs. Perhaps outside she would find an opportunity to escape, or at least learn the layout of the camp. The old woman led her from the wickiup into blinding sunlight. Rebecca blinked rapidly, taking in her surroundings. The camp was nestled in a canyon, sheltered by high red rock walls. Maybe 20 wickiups and brush shelters formed a loose circle around a central fire pit. Women worked at cooking fires or scraped hides. Children played a game with stones. Warriors stood guard at the canyon's narrow entrance. The old woman guided her to a small stream that ran along one edge of the camp, indicated that Rebecca should wash, then stepped back a respectful distance, though not far enough to allow any escape attempt. As Rebecca knelt awkwardly to splash water on her face with her bound hands, she felt eyes upon her. Looking up, she saw Kohvari watching from a distance, his expression unreadable as always. Their eyes locked, and a strange sensation passed through Rebecca. Not fear, not hatred, but something more complex that she refused to examine. She turned away sharply, focusing on the cold water against her skin. When she finished, the old woman led her back to the wickiup, but instead of leaving her there, she took Rebecca to a larger structure where several women worked at cooking. She was given a simple task, grinding corn between stones, which she could manage despite her bonds. The women spoke among themselves in Apache, occasionally glancing at Rebecca with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. One younger woman spat on the ground near Rebecca's feet, saying something that made the others laugh. Rebecca kept her head high, refusing to show intimidation. She ground the corn methodically, using the monotonous task to observe the camp's routines, noting the number of warriors, the location of weapons, the patterns of movement. Hours passed this way. Rebecca was given water but still refused food when it was offered. By late afternoon, her hunger had become a hollow ache, but her pride would not bend. As dusk approached, she was returned to the wickiup. To her surprise, Kohvari waited inside, seated cross-legged on the earthen floor. Beside him lay a fresh bowl of stew and a portion of flat bread. "You have not eaten for 2 days," he said when the old woman had gone. "Your strength fades." Rebecca stood as straight as her exhaustion would allow. "Why do you care? Why keep me alive at all? What do you want from me?" Kohvari's dark eyes studied her with that same unsettling intensity. "You called my name at the stream. You knew me. You came alone into Apache territory armed. I want to know why." Rebecca laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Isn't it obvious? You're a murderer, a raider. You've killed dozens of settlers." "And you?" he asked quietly. "What blood stains your hands?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "None," she whispered. "Unlike you." Kohvari was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "What is your name?" Rebecca hesitated, seeing no harm in answering. "Rebecca. Rebecca Hartwell." Something changed in his expression, a subtle shift she couldn't interpret. "Hartwell," he repeated. "From the Eastern Valley. 5 summers passed." The world seemed to tilt beneath Rebecca's feet. "You remember," she breathed, hatred surging anew. "You remember burning our home, killing my family." Kohvari's face remained impassive, but his eyes, those dark, unfathomable eyes, held something that might have been sorrow. "I remember," he said softly, "but not as you believe." "Liar!" Rebecca lunged forward, bound hands outstretched as if to strike him, but weakness from hunger made her stumble. Kohvari caught her arms, steadying her without effort. The contact sent a shock through Rebecca's body. The first time he had touched her. His hands were warm, calloused, strong without being cruel. She jerked away as if burned. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the food. "Tomorrow, we will speak of the past, of truth." He left her then, the wickiup suddenly feeling empty in his absence. Rebecca sank to her knees beside the food, trembling with emotion she couldn't name. Hunger finally overcame pride, and she ate mechanically, tasting nothing. That night, she dreamed of fire again. But this time, in the heart of the flames, she saw Kohvari's eyes watching her with that same unfathomable expression, neither hatred nor cruelty, but something that terrified her far more. Days passed, blurring together in Rebecca's captivity. Her bindings were removed after the third day, a sign of either trust or confidence that she could not escape the well-guarded canyon. She was put to work with the other women, preparing food, tanning hides, collecting firewood. The tasks were familiar enough. She had grown up on a frontier homestead where everyone worked from dawn until dusk. The Apache women largely ignored her, speaking around her as if she were invisible. Only the old woman, who Rebecca learned was called Nantai, meaning mother in Apache, showed her any kindness, patiently correcting her when she performed a task incorrectly. Kohvari remained an enigma. He would disappear for days with hunting parties, then return to observe her from a distance. Sometimes at night, he would come to the wickiup where she was kept and sit in silence, watching her with those unreadable eyes before leaving without a word. Rebecca maintained her hatred like a shield, though as the days stretched into weeks, she found it required more conscious effort. The Apaches were not the mindless savages of her nightmares. They were people, complex, individual with their own customs and codes. The children played and laughed like children anywhere, the women gossiped and sang as they worked, the warriors showed surprising tenderness toward their families. None of this erased what had happened to her family, but it complicated the simple narrative of vengeance that had sustained her for 5 years. On her 15th day of captivity, everything changed. Rebecca was gathering firewood at the edge of the camp when she heard a child's cry of pain. She turned to see a young boy, perhaps 6 years old, clutching his hand. He had been playing with a knife, against all rules, she was certain, and had cut himself badly. Without thinking, Rebecca dropped her bundle of wood and hurried to the child. Blood flowed freely from a deep gash across his palm. The boy looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. Drawing on the first aid knowledge she had learned as a teacher, Rebecca tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it tightly around the boy's hand, applying pressure to stem the bleeding. "It's all right," she said softly, forgetting that he wouldn't understand her words. "You'll be fine." The boy's mother appeared moments later, her face transforming from concern to suspicion when she saw Rebecca holding her son's hand. She spoke sharply in Apache, pulling the boy away. Rebecca tried to explain through gestures that she was helping, but the woman's expression remained hostile. Other women gathered, their voices rising in anger. Rebecca backed away, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. Then Kohvari was there, his tall figure cutting through the crowd. He spoke to the boy's mother, his voice calm but authoritative. He examined the child's bandaged hand, then turned to Rebecca with an expression she couldn't read. "Come," he said simply, gesturing for her to follow. He led her away from the crowd to the stream that ran through the canyon. For several minutes he said nothing, simply watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Why did you help the boy?" he asked finally. Rebecca frowned. "He was hurt. What else would I do? Many of your people would say he is just an Apache, just a savage." His voice held no accusation, only a question. "He's a child," Rebecca said. "No child deserves to suffer." Kohvari nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he suspected. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will show you the truth of what happened at your family's homestead. Be ready at dawn." Before Rebecca could respond, he walked away, leaving her with questions that burned hotter than her fading hatred. True to his word, Kohvari came for her at first light. He brought a horse for her, her own mare, she realized with surprise, the one she had been riding when captured. "Where are we going?" she asked as she mounted, noting that her hands remained unbound despite the obvious opportunity for escape that horseback provided. "To the past," he replied cryptically, swinging onto his own horse, a magnificent pinto stallion that moved with fluid grace. They rode out of the canyon, accompanied by 2 other warriors who kept a respectful distance. Rebecca considered making a break for freedom, but realized she had no idea where they were or how to find her way back to Mesa Verde. The desert was an unforgiving place for those who didn't know its secrets. They rode for hours, the landscape gradually becoming familiar to Rebecca. Hills she remembered from childhood, rock formations that had once been landmarks in her family's travels. Her heart began to race as she realized where they were heading. By midday they crested a rise, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Below lay the valley where her family's homestead had stood, where she had hidden in a root cellar as flames consumed everything she loved. The house was long gone, of course. Nothing remained but the stone foundation and the charred remnants of what had once been a barn. The creek still ran through the property, and wild grasses had reclaimed what had once been cultivated fields. Rebecca felt dizzy with conflicting emotions: grief, rage, a strange sense of homecoming. She dismounted without waiting for Kohvari, walking numbly toward the ruins. The root cellar where she had hidden was still there, its wooden doors rotted but recognizable. Rebecca knelt beside it, running her fingers over the weathered wood, remembering the terrified girl who had emerged to find her world reduced to ashes. She sensed rather than heard Kohvari approach and stand behind her. "Why have you brought me here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "To show you truth," he said. 5 summers past your family died here, but not by my hand or my people's." Rebecca turned to face him, anger flaring. "I saw Apache warriors. I heard their war cries." Kohvari's face remained impassive, but his eyes held that same shadow she had glimpsed before. "What you saw were men wearing Apache dress, using Apache calls. Men who wished the blame to fall on my people." "That's a convenient lie," Rebecca spat, rising to her feet. "It is an inconvenient truth," Kohvari countered. "Your father, James Hartwell, was a good man. He traded fairly with the Apache. He spoke our language. He helped our sick when the reservation agency would not." The use of her father's name startled Rebecca. "How do you know my father's name?" "Because I knew him," Kohvari said simply. "I was a scout for the cavalry then. Your father helped me when I was wounded in a skirmish with Comanche raiders. He sheltered me for 3 days, though it was forbidden to aid Apache." Rebecca stared at him, her certainties crumbling. If what you say is true, then who killed my family?" "Men who wanted this land. Men who knew your father protected the Apache who still lived free. Men who wore our dress and used our weapons, but were not of our blood." Kohvari's voice hardened. "I found their trail. I hunted them. 3 have paid with their lives, 2 remain." Rebecca felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "Who?" she whispered. "Who are they?" "The last 2 walk in your world, not mine. One calls himself a lawman now." Kohvari's eyes met hers. "The other sells whiskey to children in the town you call Mesa Verde." The implications crashed over Rebecca like a flood. Sheriff Caldwell and Samuel Burke, the saloon owner who had watched her with such calculating eyes when she arrived in town. "No," she breathed. "It can't be." "The past speaks with many voices," Kohvari said quietly. "Some true, some false. You have heard only one voice for too long." Rebecca turned away, walking to the edge of the creek where cottonwood trees cast dappled shadows on the water. Her mind raced, re-examining memories, questioning certainties that had defined her for years. She remembered her father speaking of an Apache scout he had befriended. She remembered her mother's comments about tensions with neighbors who coveted their water rights. She remembered Sheriff Caldwell, not sheriff then, just a ranch hand, watching their property with covetous eyes. And she remembered something else. The Apache who had set fire to their barn had worn cavalry boots. She had glimpsed them as she hid, a detail that had never fit the narrative she had constructed. Kohvari approached slowly, giving her space to process this revelation. "Now you understand why I brought you to my camp rather than killing you. Why I waited for you to see us as people, not monsters from your nightmares." Rebecca looked up at him, seeing him truly for the first time, not as the embodiment of her hatred, but as a man with his own griefs, his own code of honor. "Why do you care what I believe?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "Why does it matter to you?" Kohvari was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the ruins of the homestead. "Your father saved my life," he said finally. "I could not save his, but perhaps I can save his daughter from drowning in hatred not meant for my people." The simple dignity in his words struck Rebecca deeply. She turned back to the water, watching it flow endlessly onward, just as it had when her family was alive, just as it would long after she was gone. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think." Kohvari nodded. "We will camp here tonight. Tomorrow is soon enough to decide what truths you accept." That night, Rebecca sat by their small campfire, watching the flames dance against the darkening sky. The 2 warrior escorts kept a respectful distance, leaving her alone with Kohvari and her thoughts. "Tell me about my father," she said suddenly. "What do you remember of him?" A ghost of a smile touched Kohvari's lips, the first she had seen. "He spoke badly in Apache, but he tried. He knew the names of plants and their uses. He showed respect to the land." Rebecca felt tears threatening for the first time in years. "He taught me the names of all the wildflowers in the valley. He said each one had a purpose, even if we couldn't see it." "A wise man," Kohvari agreed. He spoke often of his clever daughter with eyes like the summer sky. The tears spilled over then, years of grief finding release at last. Rebecca made no sound, but the tears flowed freely down her cheeks, glistening in the firelight. Without speaking, Kohvari moved to sit beside her. He did not touch her or offer empty words of comfort. He simply remained, a solid presence as she faced the pain she had channeled into hatred for so long. Later, as the fire burned low and the stars emerged in brilliant clarity above them, Rebecca felt a strange peace settle over her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it, like a seed waiting for rain. She turned to find Kohvari watching her, those dark eyes reflecting the ember's glow. In the firelight, the scar along his temple seemed to tell its own story of survival and pain. "What happened?" she asked, gesturing to the scar. "The men who killed your family found me tracking them," he said simply. "I was careless. They left me for dead." Rebecca's hand moved of its own accord, hovering near his face without quite touching the scar. "But you survived, as did you," he said softly. "We are both marked by the same hand, Rebecca Hartwell." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her body. She lowered her hand quickly, confused by her own reaction. "We should rest," she said, retreating to the bedroll the Apache women had prepared for her. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As she lay beneath the vast Arizona sky, Rebecca felt something shift within her, like ice breaking up after a long winter. The hatred that had defined her for so long was changing, transforming into something she wasn't ready to name. Across the dying fire, Kohvari watched over her, his silhouette merging with the darkness of the desert night. Dawn brought clarity. Rebecca woke to find Kohvari already up, speaking quietly with the two warriors who had accompanied them. When he saw her watching, he approached, his expression more open than she had yet seen it. "Have you decided?" he asked without preamble. Rebecca stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I believe you," she said simply. "Or at least I believe enough to seek the full truth. I want to return to Mesa Verde." Surprise flickered across Kohvari's face. "It is dangerous. The men who killed your family are there." "That's precisely why I must go back," Rebecca said with newfound determination. "Not for vengeance now, but for justice. True justice." Kohvari studied her face intently. "You would risk your life for this truth." "My life has been at risk since the day I decided to return west," she replied. "At least now I understand the real enemy." A hint of respect showed in Kohvari's eyes. "Then I will take you back, but not alone." They rode toward Mesa Verde with purpose, Rebecca and Kohvari side by side, the two warrior escorts following. The journey that had taken a full day before was completed in half that time, Kohvari knowing paths through the desert invisible to untrained eyes. As they neared the town, they stopped in a sheltered arroyo. Kohvari turned to Rebecca. "I cannot enter the white man's settlement. Even dressed as a scout I would be recognized." "I don't expect you to," Rebecca said. "This part I must do alone." Not entirely alone. Kohvari removed something from a pouch at his waist, a small wooden whistle carved with intricate symbols. "If you need me, use this. 3 short calls. I will be watching the town." Rebecca accepted the whistle, tucking it into her bodice. "How will I find evidence against Caldwell and Burke?" "The saloon owner, Burke, keeps a strongbox beneath the floorboards of his private room. In it are papers, including a deed to your father's land signed the day after the attack." Kohvari's eyes darkened. "I have watched these men for years, waiting for the right moment." Rebecca absorbed this information, formulating a plan. "I'll return to my position as schoolteacher. No one knows I was captured. They likely think I'm dead after my horse returned without me. I'll say I was thrown and injured, took shelter with a Mexican family while I recovered." Kohvari nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. "Be careful. These men have killed to protect their secret." Rebecca mounted her horse, then hesitated, looking back at Kohvari. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me the truth." Something passed between them then, a current like heat lightning across the desert sky. Kohvari reached out suddenly, his hand touching her cheek in a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "Return safely, Rebecca Hartwell," he said, his voice low and intense. "There is more between us than the past." The touch of his hand against her skin sent a shock through Rebecca's body, like fire igniting in her blood. She felt herself tremble slightly, confused by the intensity of her reaction. Before she could respond, he withdrew his hand and stepped back. Rebecca turned her horse toward Mesa Verde, her mind racing and her cheek still burning from his touch. Rebecca's return to Mesa Verde caused the expected stir. Her story of being thrown from her horse and helped by a Mexican family was accepted without question, particularly when she displayed a healing bruise on her temple, courtesy of her initial capture, but useful for her deception. Sheriff Caldwell seemed genuinely relieved to see her, which confused Rebecca until she realized that her disappearance had threatened his carefully constructed respectability. Samuel Burke was less pleased, watching her with calculating eyes from the doorway of his saloon as she made her way to the schoolhouse. For 2 weeks, Rebecca played her role perfectly, the dedicated teacher by day, while at night she carefully observed the movements of the 2 men she now knew to be her family's killers. She wrote detailed notes, mapping their routines, their associations, their weaknesses. Burke was the more vulnerable target. His private room above the saloon was accessible via an exterior staircase, and he often left it unattended when he visited the town's brothel every Wednesday night. On the 3rd Wednesday after her return, Rebecca put her plan into action. Dressed in dark clothing, her hair hidden beneath a shawl, she slipped through the shadows to the saloon after midnight. The exterior staircase creaked slightly beneath her weight, but the sounds from the saloon below masked her approach. Burke's room was locked, but Rebecca had come prepared. During her years in Boston, she had befriended a locksmith's daughter who had taught her several useful skills. Within minutes, she was inside. The room smelled of cheap whiskey and tobacco. Rebecca worked methodically, searching for the loose floorboards Kohvari had mentioned. She found them beneath a worn rug beside the bed, 3 boards that shifted when pressed. Lifting them revealed a space containing a metal strongbox. This lock was more challenging, but Rebecca had anticipated this as well. From her pocket she produced a slender metal tool. 10 minutes of careful manipulation, and the lock yielded with a soft click. Inside the box lay several documents, land deeds, letters, a small leather pouch of gold coins. Rebecca's hands trembled as she found what she sought, a deed to the Hartwell property, dated 1 day after the massacre, signed by Samuel Burke and Edward Caldwell, along with a 3rd name, Judge Henry Preston. More damning still was a letter, written in Caldwell's hand, discussing the Apache problem, and how removing Hartwell will serve as an example to others who might sympathize with the savages. Rebecca's blood ran cold as she read these confirmations of Kohvari's story. She carefully placed the most incriminating documents inside her bodice, then returned the strongbox to its hiding place. As she turned to leave, the door burst open. Samuel Burke stood in the doorway, a pistol in his hand and fury in his bloodshot eyes. "I knew there was something wrong about you," he slurred, clearly drunk but dangerous nonetheless. "Snooping around, asking questions. Should have known James Hartwell's brat wouldn't stay dead." Rebecca backed away, her mind racing. "You murdered my family," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "You and Caldwell and Judge Preston." Burke's face twisted with cruel amusement. "Your pa was a fool, sympathizing with Apache's, refusing to sell when we offered fair price." He gestured with the pistol. "Now you'll join him. Tragic accident. Schoolteacher caught stealing, shot while trying to escape." Rebecca's hand moved to her bodice, not for the documents, but for Kohvari's whistle. As Burke advanced, she raised it to her lips and blew 3 short, sharp blasts. Burke lunged forward, striking her hand and sending the whistle flying. He grabbed her by the throat, pushing her against the wall. "No one's coming to save you, girl." Rebecca fought desperately, clawing at his face, kicking at his legs. Her fingers found his eyes, and he howled in pain, releasing her momentarily. She lunged for the door, but he recovered quickly, grabbing her skirt and yanking her backward. They struggled fiercely, knocking over a lamp that shattered, spilling kerosene across the wooden floor. A spark from the broken chimney ignited the fuel, and flames leaped up with frightening speed. Burke seemed not to notice the fire, focused entirely on subduing Rebecca. He struck her hard across the face, and she tasted blood. As she staggered, he raised his pistol again. The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Kohvari's powerful figure launched through the opening, landing with cat-like grace despite the dramatic entrance. In one fluid motion, he crossed the room and struck Burke with devastating force, sending the saloon owner crashing against the wall. The pistol discharged wildly, the bullet splintering the ceiling. Burke recovered quickly, drawing a knife from his boot and lunging at Kohvari with surprising speed for a drunken man. Kohvari evaded the thrust, his movements precise and controlled. The two men circled each other as the fire spread, flames licking up the walls and filling the room with acrid smoke. "Apache dog," Burke snarled, feinting with his knife. "Should have killed you years ago when I had the chance." "You tried," Kohvari replied coolly, the scar on his temple seeming to emphasize his words. "As you tried with her, you failed both times." Rebecca searched desperately for a weapon, finding a heavy brass candlestick on a nearby table. As Burke lunged again at Kohvari, she swung with all her strength, connecting with the back of the saloon owner's head. He stumbled forward, directly into Kohvari's waiting knife. Burke's eyes widened in shock and pain. He looked down at the blade embedded in his chest, then back at Kohvari with hatred and disbelief. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only blood emerged. He collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward onto the burning floor. "We must go," Kohvari said urgently, grabbing Rebecca's arm. "The fire spreads quickly." The flames had indeed engulfed half the room already, the heat intense and the smoke thickening. Kohvari led Rebecca to the window, but the fire had reached the exterior staircase, which was now engulfed in flames. "Hold to me," Kohvari commanded, wrapping a strong arm around Rebecca's waist. Without hesitation, she pressed herself against him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. Kohvari leapt from the window to a nearby roof, his powerful legs absorbing the impact. They scrambled across the slanted surface and down a rain barrel to the alley below, just as shouts of "Fire!" began to echo through the town. "The documents," Rebecca gasped, remembering their importance. "I have them, proof against Caldwell and the judge." Kohvari nodded grimly. "Then we must leave now, before Caldwell realizes what has happened." They slipped through back alleys as the town awakened to the growing inferno. The saloon was fully ablaze now, the fire spreading to adjacent buildings despite the bucket brigade that was hastily forming. At the edge of town, 2 Apache warriors waited with horses, the same men who had accompanied them to her family's homestead. Rebecca's mare nickered softly in recognition as she approached. "We ride for the canyon," Kohvari said, helping her mount. "You will be safe there while we decide how to use these documents." As they galloped away from Mesa Verde, Rebecca looked back to see the town silhouetted against the night sky, orange flames leaping high. A strange sense of liberation filled her, not joy at Burke's death, but release from the prison of hatred and lies that had confined her for so long. They rode hard through the night, following paths invisible to Rebecca's eyes, but clearly known to Kohvari. By dawn, they had reached the Red Rock Canyon where the Apache band made their home. Exhaustion and the aftermath of danger caught up with Rebecca as they dismounted. She swayed slightly, and Kohvari was instantly at her side, his arm supporting her. "You are injured," he said, his voice concerned as he examined the bruise forming where Burke had struck her. "I'm all right," she assured him, though in truth every muscle ached and her head throbbed painfully. Kohvari led her to his own wickiup, rather than the one where she had been kept before. Inside it was similar to her previous dwelling, but contained more personal items, weapons, ceremonial objects, a beautifully crafted saddle. "Rest," he said, indicating a bed of soft furs. "You are safe now." Rebecca sank gratefully onto the furs, but as Kohvari turned to leave, she caught his hand. "Stay," she said softly. "Please." He hesitated, then seated himself beside her, his expression questioning. Rebecca drew the documents from her bodice and handed them to him. "It's all here. Proof that Caldwell Burke and Judge Preston conspired to kill my family and take our land." Kohvari examined the papers carefully, his face hardening as he read. "These men sought to blame my people for their crimes. Many Apache died in army reprisals after your family was killed." "I know," Rebecca said quietly, and I helped spread their lie by believing it, by hating your people without question. You were a child, Kohvari said gently. You saw what they wanted you to see. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, not of grief this time, but of release. For 5 years I lived for vengeance. Now I don't know what to live for. Kohvari's hand moved to her face, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch sent that same fire through her veins, more intense now in the intimacy of the moment. Live for truth, he said softly. Live for justice. Live for the future instead of the past. Rebecca looked up at him, seeing emotions in his dark eyes that mirrored her own confusion, her own awakening. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, the meeting of two worlds long kept apart by hatred and misunderstanding. Then, Kohvari's hand moved to the back of her neck, drawing her closer, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more primal. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Rebecca felt as if something fundamental had shifted within her, as if the last walls around her heart had crumbled to dust. "I don't understand this," she whispered, her hand resting against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. "A month ago I would have killed you without hesitation." "And I you," Kohvari admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "The spirits have strange paths for us to walk." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Kohvari rose reluctantly. "You must rest," he said. "Tomorrow we will decide how to use these documents, how to bring true justice to those who remain." Rebecca nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. As Kohvari moved to the entrance, she called after him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me the truth, for saving my life, for—" She trailed off, unable to name the other things for which she was grateful. Kohvari's eyes softened. "Sleep, Rebecca Hartwell. Dreams will come easier now." And indeed they did. For the first time in 5 years, Rebecca slept without nightmares, without the screams of her family echoing in her mind. Instead, she dreamed of desert skies, of red rock canyons, and of dark eyes that saw beyond her hatred to the wounded heart beneath. 3 days passed in the Apache camp, days that transformed Rebecca's understanding of herself and the world. She observed the daily life of the people she had once feared, participating in their tasks, learning fragments of their language from the patient Nantai. The old woman had taken to calling her Nada, meaning eyes in Apache, a reference to her bright blue eyes that stood out so starkly among the dark-eyed tribe. Kohvari was often absent, leading hunting parties or consulting with other warriors about the increasing military presence in the territory. When he returned to the camp, his eyes would seek her out immediately, and something would pass between them, unspoken but powerful. They had not kissed again since that night, both seemingly aware that larger matters required resolution before they could explore what was growing between them. On the 4th morning, Kohvari found Rebecca by the stream washing clothes with the other women. He gestured for her to follow him to a more private spot beneath a cottonwood tree. "I have been considering the documents," he said without preamble. "They prove Caldwell's guilt, but how to use them? The white man's courts rarely find justice for Indian wrongs, and your word against a sheriff will carry little weight." Rebecca had been thinking about this problem as well. "There's another way," she said. "Judge Preston is based in Tucson. He doesn't know me by sight. I was away at school in the East when my family was killed, and I've never appeared in his court." Kohvari's eyebrow raised, sensing she had a plan. "If I could get an audience with him, show him the documents, make him believe I'm acting on behalf of someone else who discovered them," Rebecca continued. "He might implicate Caldwell to save himself," Kohvari finished, nodding slowly. "The weakest link in the chain." "Exactly. And a judge's testimony against a sheriff would carry weight even in a frontier court." Kohvari considered this. "It is dangerous. If he suspects who you really are—" "He won't," Rebecca said with confidence. "Men like Preston see what they expect to see. A respectable schoolteacher, nothing more." Kohvari studied her face, pride and concern warring in his expression. "You have the courage of a warrior, Rebecca Hartwell." She smiled slightly. "I learned from watching you." His hand reached out, fingers lightly tracing the line of her jaw. "When this is finished, what then? You will return to your world, teaching children, living in the white man's town. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. I don't know, Rebecca admitted. Everything has changed. I've changed. Kohvari nodded, understanding in his eyes. First justice, he said. Then the future will reveal itself. The plan took shape over the next day. Rebecca would travel to Tucson, presenting herself as Elizabeth Carson, a schoolteacher from Phoenix who had come into possession of disturbing documents. Kohvari would accompany her part of the way, then send 2 trusted warriors to watch over her in the city. They set out at dawn, Rebecca once again dressed in her schoolteacher's clothes, which had been carefully washed and mended by Nantai. Kohvari wore the clothing of an army scout, a disguise that would allow him to travel more freely in the territory. As they rode side by side through the desert, Rebecca found herself studying Kohvari's profile against the rising sun. The proud line of his nose, the strength in his jaw, the quiet dignity in his bearing, all things she had been blind to when hatred clouded her vision. "What will happen to your people?" she asked suddenly. "Even if we succeed, the army still pushes the Apache onto reservations or hunts them down." Kohvari's expression remained stoic, but sorrow deepened in his eyes. "The old ways are ending," he acknowledged. "My grandfather saw it coming when the first white settlers arrived. My father fought against it and died with an army bullet in his heart. I have tried to find a middle path, to understand your people while remaining true to mine. And now?" He was silent for a long moment. "Now I see that the future will belong to those who can walk in both worlds. My people cannot return to the past. We must find a way to keep our spirit while living in a changing land." The wisdom and sadness in his words touched Rebecca deeply. Her own world had been shattered and rebuilt in ways she never imagined. Perhaps that was the nature of life on this frontier. Constant reinvention, adaptation, the painful birth of something new from the ashes of the old. They camped that night beside a small desert spring, the warriors who accompanied them keeping a respectful distance. Under the vast Arizona sky, with stars scattered like silver dust across the blackness, Rebecca and Kohvari sat close to their small fire, speaking softly of their childhoods, their dreams, the paths that had led them to this moment. "I was to marry a Boston banker's son," Rebecca confessed with a small laugh. "My aunt arranged it all, a respectable match to help me forget my unfortunate past, as she called it." "And you refused this match?" Kohvari asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I left in the night with only a letter of explanation," Rebecca said. "He was a good man, kind enough in his way, but—" She struggled to explain. "He lived in a world of ledgers and social calls, of certainties and conventions. There was no room for questions, for doubts, for the parts of me that never healed after what happened to my family." Kohvari nodded, understanding perfectly. "He could not see all of you." "No," Rebecca agreed softly. "No one ever has." Their eyes met across the fire, and in that moment Rebecca knew with sudden clarity that Kohvari saw her, all of her, the strength and the weakness, the courage and the fear, the hatred she had carried, and the love she was capable of. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her body. They sat in silence, connected by that single point of contact, as the fire burned low and the desert night embraced them. Later, as Rebecca lay in her bedroll, sleep eluding her, she heard Kohvari move to sit beside her. His hand gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Kohvari," she whispered, his name a question and an answer all at once. He leaned down, his lips finding hers in the darkness. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain, laden with longing held in check for too long. Rebecca's arms wrapped around his neck, drawing him closer, her body arching toward his with a need that both frightened and exhilarated her. Kohvari's hands moved over her with reverent gentleness, as if she were something precious and fragile. When he pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged, Rebecca could see the battle between desire and honor in his eyes. "I would not dishonor you," he said softly. Rebecca touched his face, tracing the scar that had become so dear to her. "There is no dishonor in love," she whispered. The word hung between them. Love, unplanned and unexpected, blossoming in the most unlikely soil. Kohvari's expression softened. vulnerability showing through his warrior's composure. "Among my people, to lie with a woman is to make her your wife in the eyes of the spirits." Rebecca's heart swelled with emotion she could no longer deny. "And if that is what I want?" His answer came not in words, but in the tender kiss he pressed to her forehead, her eyelids the corners of her mouth. They came together under the desert stars, two worlds meeting, barriers of culture and history falling away, until there was only man and woman, skin against skin, heart against heart. Their loving was gentle at first, then increasingly urgent, a claiming of each other that transcended the physical. Rebecca felt herself transformed in Kohvari's arms, reborn through his touch, her past receding like shadows before dawn. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath his blanket, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. No words were necessary in the perfect stillness of the moment. Rebecca knew that whatever came next, whether justice or tragedy awaited them in Tucson, she had found something she had never expected to find in this harsh territory. A love that healed rather than consumed, that built rather than destroyed. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with delicate fingers of pink and gold, Kohvari spoke softly against her hair. "In my language there is a word, isei, that means the path that leads to harmony. I believed this path was closed to me, that my destiny was to fight until death. Now I see another way." Rebecca raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "What way?" "A life between worlds," he said. "Not fully Apache, not fully white, but something new, something that might show others that different peoples can find common ground." The vision he described resonated deeply with Rebecca. She, too, no longer belonged fully to the world of her birth. Her experiences had placed her at the boundary between cultures, able to see truth on both sides. "Whatever happens in Tucson," she said with sudden conviction, "I want to walk that path with you, Kohvari." His smile, rare and beautiful, was like sunrise breaking over the desert. He pressed his forehead to hers in an intimate gesture she had seen between Apache couples. "Then we will walk it together, my Nada'a," he said softly, "and make a new world in the space between the old ones." Tucson bustled with activity, wagons rumbling down dusty streets, merchants hawking wares, soldiers from the nearby fort mingling with settlers, Mexican laborers, and the occasional well-dressed businessman. After days in the quiet of the desert, the noise and crowds made Rebecca tense and watchful. She had parted from Kohvari 10 miles outside the city, their farewell brief but charged with emotion. His two warriors, dressed as Mexican laborers, would watch over her from a distance, ready to intervene if needed. Rebecca checked into a small hotel using her false name, Elizabeth Carson. She had prepared her story carefully. She was a schoolteacher from Phoenix who had come into possession of disturbing documents while settling the estate of a deceased uncle, a former business partner of Judge Preston. The Pima County Courthouse stood in the center of town, an imposing adobe structure that housed both the court and various territorial offices. Rebecca dressed with care in her most respectable attire, a high-necked navy dress with modest trim, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style. Judge Henry Preston proved easier to access than she had expected. His clerk, impressed by her genteel manner and apparent connection to a former associate of the judge, arranged an appointment for that very afternoon. The judge himself was a corpulent man in his 60s, with thinning grey hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Rebecca coolly as she entered his chambers. He did not rise from behind his massive oak desk. "Miss Carson, is it? Forgive me for not recalling your uncle. In my position, one meets so many people." His tone suggested he found most of them beneath notice. Rebecca adopted a slightly nervous demeanor, playing the role of a respectable spinster unused to such encounters. "Thank you for seeing me, Your Honor. My late uncle, Jonathan Carson, spoke highly of you. He was involved in land transactions throughout the territory." Preston's interest visibly sharpened. "Land transactions, you say? Refresh my memory as to the specific ventures." "That's actually why I'm here, Your Honor." Rebecca opened her reticule and withdrew the documents she had taken from Burke's strongbox, keeping them partially concealed in her lap. "While settling his estate, I found some troubling papers. I wasn't sure what to do with them, but I felt you should see them given your involvement. She handed him the letter first, the one written in Caldwell's hand, discussing the Apache problem and the need to remove Hartwell. Preston's face remained impassive as he read, but Rebecca noticed a slight trembling in his hands. "And where did you say you obtained this?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "My uncle's personal effects," Rebecca lied smoothly. "There's more." She passed him the deed to the Hartwell property, bearing his signature alongside those of Burke and Caldwell. Preston's complexion reddened as he examined the document. His eyes flicked to Rebecca's face, calculating, reassessing. "Miss Carson," he said after a moment, "these papers appear to be forgeries. I recommend you destroy them before they cause unnecessary trouble." Rebecca maintained her facade of nervous propriety. "Forgeries? But they bear your signature, Your Honor. And my uncle kept detailed records of all his transactions. There are copies." This was a bluff, but Preston had no way of knowing that. His expression hardened. "I don't know what game you're playing, young woman, but I advise you to tread carefully. Making accusations against a territorial judge could have serious consequences." Rebecca leaned forward slightly, dropping her pretense of timidity. "I'm not making accusations, Your Honor. I'm offering you an opportunity. These documents implicate Sheriff Caldwell and the late Mr. Burke far more directly than yourself. Your signature could be explained away as administrative oversight. Theirs cannot." Preston's eyes narrowed as he grasped her meaning. "You want me to testify against Caldwell?" "I want justice," Rebecca said simply. "For the Hartwell family, for the Apache who were blamed for a crime they didn't commit. How you provide that justice is your concern." A tense silence filled the chamber. Preston studied Rebecca with new eyes, clearly reassessing the seemingly proper schoolteacher before him. "Who are you really?" he asked finally. "You're no niece of any Jonathan Carson." "I never knew such a man." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is what you'll do now." Preston's hand moved toward a drawer in his desk, reaching, Rebecca suspected, for a weapon. She tensed, ready to flee if necessary. Before either could act, the door to the chamber opened. A young clerk entered, followed by two men in military uniform, a captain and a lieutenant, judging by their insignia. "Forgive the interruption, Your Honor," the captain said, his eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment. "I'm Captain James Reynolds, Fort Lowell. We're investigating allegations of corruption among territorial officials. I believe you have information that might interest us." Preston's face drained of color. "This is highly irregular, Captain. I'm in the middle of a private meeting." The captain turned to Rebecca. "Ma'am, are those the Hartwell documents?" Rebecca's surprise must have shown on her face, because the captain smiled slightly. "We've been building a case for months," he explained. "An Apache scout provided information that led us to investigate Sheriff Caldwell and his associates. We've been waiting for concrete evidence." Understanding dawned on Rebecca. Kohvari had done more than track her family's killers. He had been working with sympathetic army officials to build a legal case against them. The army captain's arrival was no coincidence. She handed the documents to Captain Reynolds, who examined them with evident satisfaction. "These will do nicely," he said. He turned to Preston, whose face had gone ashen. "Judge Preston, I believe you have a choice to make. Cooperation now might be viewed favorably when this matter goes before a military tribunal." Preston's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Caldwell was the instigator," he said dully. "He wanted the Hartwell water rights. Burke handled the practical aspects. I merely processed the paperwork afterward." "And provided judicial cover for blaming the Apache," the captain added coldly. Preston didn't deny it. He looked suddenly old, diminished by the exposure of his crimes. The captain nodded to his lieutenant. "Place Judge Preston under military custody. We'll proceed to Mesa Verde to apprehend Sheriff Caldwell." As the lieutenant moved to escort Preston from the chamber, the judge looked at Rebecca with sudden clarity. "You're her, aren't you? The Hartwell girl. They said you died with the others." Rebecca stood tall, 5 years of grief and hatred and newfound purpose in her voice as she answered, "No, Judge Preston. I survived to see justice done. Remember that in your cell." The events that followed seemed to happen with dreamlike speed. Rebecca traveled with Captain Reynolds and his men to Mesa Verde, where Sheriff Caldwell was arrested without incident, the fight gone out of him when he learned of Burke's death and Preston's confession. A military tribunal was convened at Fort Lowell. Rebecca testified about the night of the attack, about what she had seen and heard from her hiding place in the root cellar. To her surprise, Kohvari also appeared, testifying as a former army scout about the evidence he had gathered over the years. Justice, when it came, was swift and uncompromising. Caldwell and Preston were sentenced to life imprisonment at the territorial prison in Yuma, a fate many considered worse than hanging in the brutal desert heat. More importantly to Rebecca, the official record was amended to show that her family's murder had been committed by white men disguised as Apache, not by the tribe itself. A small victory in the larger tragedy of frontier relations, but a victory nonetheless. After the tribunal, Rebecca found herself at a crossroads. She could not return to Mesa Verde. Too many painful memories lingered there. Boston held nothing for her now. That chapter of her life was firmly closed. She stood on the parade ground at Fort Lowell, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, when she sensed rather than heard Kohvari approach. "It is done," he said simply, coming to stand beside her. "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "Justice, after all these years." "And now?" he asked, the question encompassing all the uncertainties of their future. Rebecca turned to face him, seeing in his dark eyes the same questions that had plagued her own thoughts. "Captain Reynolds offered me a position," she said, "teaching at the new Indian school they're establishing near the fort. Children from different tribes, learning to read and write English." Kohvari nodded slowly. "And did you accept?" "I told him I needed to consult my husband first," Rebecca said, a smile touching her lips as she watched surprise and then joy transform Kohvari's stoic features. "Husband?" he repeated, taking her hands in his. "Among your people, to lie with a woman is to make her your wife in the eyes of the spirits," Rebecca reminded him softly. "Unless you've changed your mind." Kohvari's answer was to draw her into his arms, heedless of the soldiers and civilians who might observe them. "Never," he whispered against her hair. "You are my nada, my light in darkness." Rebecca felt tears of happiness blur her vision as she held tightly to this man who had transformed from enemy to savior to beloved. "The school needs someone who understands Apache ways," she said. "Someone who can help the children walk between worlds without losing themselves." Kohvari pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "A worthy path," he agreed, "for both of us." And so it was decided. They were married twice, once in the Apache way beneath the stars with Nantai and the tribe as witnesses, and once by an army chaplain who owed Captain Reynolds a favor and was willing to overlook certain regulations about white women marrying Indians. The Indian school became their life's work, a place where children of different tribes learned not only English and arithmetic, but pride in their heritage, respect for their traditions. Kohvari taught the boys hunting and tracking skills, the old stories and songs of the desert. Rebecca taught reading and writing, and learned alongside her students the wisdom of living in harmony with the harsh but beautiful land. They built a home on the edge of Tucson, a place that belonged neither fully to the white world nor to the Apache one, a third space where both were welcome. Children came, first a daughter with Rebecca's blue eyes and Kohvari's copper skin, then twin boys who inherited their father's quiet strength and their mother's determination. There were hardships, of course. Not everyone approved of their union. Some settlers refused to speak to Rebecca. Some Apache viewed Kohvari with suspicion. But over time, their home became a gathering place for those who believed in the possibility of understanding across the boundaries of culture and history. On summer evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their adobe home, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. Rebecca would often think of how far she had traveled, not just in miles, but in spirit, from the hatred-consumed girl who had arrived in Arizona seeking vengeance. "What are you thinking?" Kohvari would ask, his hand finding hers in the gathering dusk. And Rebecca would smile, turning to the man whose touch had once ignited fire in her blood, and now kindled the steady flame of enduring love in her heart. "I'm thinking of paths," she would say, "of how the most difficult ones often lead us home." In the distance, the desert stretched endlessly beneath the vast Arizona sky, a land of harshness and beauty, of life emerging from seemingly barren soil. Just as love had blossomed from hatred, just as hope had risen from despair, just as two people from opposing worlds had found in each other not an enemy, but a future. The end. Dear listener, tonight, I want to speak not just to your ears, but to your heart. You who have lived through seasons of joy and sorrow, you who have weathered storms, seen the world change, and carried so much with grace. You are living proof that strength does not shout, it endures. Rebecca's story is not only about the Wild West, it's about all of us, about how even after deep loss and long years of silence, the heart can still open again, to truth, to healing, to love. There may be wounds in your past that no one sees. There may be memories that still bring tears to your eyes, but just as the desert blooms after rain, your life still holds the power to bloom in the most unexpected moments. So tonight, as you lay your head down to rest, may you feel safe. May you feel seen. And may you know, truly know, that your story is still unfolding, and the best chapters might yet be ahead. We honor you. We thank you for your resilience, your wisdom, your presence in this world. With heartfelt gratitude, Wild West Whispers team. Thank you so much for joining us on this unforgettable journey. Your presence, your time, and your heart mean everything to us. If this story brought you comfort, reflection, or inspiration, we kindly invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of truth and love again. Your support keeps our stories alive and keeps us deeply motivated to continue creating tales filled with hope, redemption, courage, and unexpected love. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. And don't forget, at the end of this video, another beautiful story from our channel will appear. Click it and be surprised by more emotional journeys like this one. With love, Wild West Whispers team.